thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk about a topic which is very interesting for all Puerto Ricans, but I would love to know after my presentation if it is of interest to you too, because in my country it is so controversial that I really want to know if it is seen like that in other parts of the world, like here in Canada. So I'll present to you my paper, which I entitled The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Sovereignty or Submission. Puerto Rico is torn between two concepts, sovereignty and submission. Is Puerto Rico a sovereign nation? Is it a dependency of the United States? Is it a Commonwealth? Is it a territory? What is it? What is the nature of Puerto Rico's political status? 6 decades after the establishment of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, neither Puerto Ricans, nor the U.S. Congress, nor the rest of the world for that matter, seem to be able to come to terms with a standard definition. Both the U.S. Supreme Court and the United Nations have been clear on the matter, but Puerto Rico's political status is still unclear for most. This issue creates controversy and uncertainty among all aspects of the Puerto Rican life and everyone else related. Every single political election on the island is based on the status question. The very nature of each political party revolves around it. Every 4 years, the platforms deal with the same question over and over again. Isn't it time to understand the nature of the Commonwealth and leave the issue behind? After more than a century of debate, isn't it time to move to more important matters? Confusion over the status question in Puerto Rico arose from its very beginning. In the 1950s, when the founder of the Commonwealth, Luis Muñoz Marín, first described it as a political status that should evolve. Although he asserted that the new political status of Puerto Rico in relationship to the United States was permanent in nature, he also insisted that this relationship must improve over the years. Here's the ambiguity. It is precisely this argument, the question of improvement, which has made the people doubt its legitimacy. Why improve? Why change? As such, the status question has been a matter of debate ever since. It is time to put an end to the debate. The status question must be clarified once and for all. This presentation provides some facts that, if carefully examined, could explain and define Puerto Rico's political status. It may bring new light, certainty, and peace of mind towards Puerto Rico's political identity. Once the status question is understood, maybe the Puerto Rican people can concentrate on finding ways to improve their quality of life. Like I see here in Canada, like even in my hotel room, you have recycling bags. I mean, you're so environmentally conscious, and that's something I don't see in Puerto Rico. That's what I mean, that we should concentrate on other things than just the status. There's some misguided information about the status of Puerto Rico. Most people are misinformed about Puerto Rico's political status. Nowadays, with such an easy access to information, anyone like you interested in knowing about this subject will probably search the net. So let's do it. Let's say we type Puerto Rico's political status in any search engine. Google, for instance, provides 1,090,000 entries for that particular subject. 1,140,000 Yahoo. From Wikipedia to Global Voices, almost every single location portrays Puerto Rico as a territory of the United States. This information is incorrect. Probably it is because most entries in a popular place of reference, such as the web, tend to simplify things to the point of overlooking more complicated and deeper approaches. The political status of Puerto Rico is by far more than a wiki fact. On the other hand, if one is to redirect attention to a more serious and reliable source, that of an academic, for instance, let's say an entry by a political science professor from the University of Puerto Rico, which reads like this, and I quote, "The popular view of the current legal status of Puerto Rico is that the island is a Commonwealth of the United States. Constitutionally, this is a misconception. The Supreme Court of the United States has described that Puerto Rico is, in fact, a non-incorporated territory of the United States." End of quote. And that's from author Garriga Picot, and his article is entitled The United States and Puerto Rico Federal Relations Act Background, Issues and Principles. I could write this statement totally backwards. I would say, and I quote myself, it's the same sentence but backwards. The popular view of the current legal status of Puerto Rico is that the island is a territory of the United States. Constitutionally, this is a misconception. The Supreme Court of the United States has decided that Puerto Rico is not, in fact, a territory of the United States. Let's take another example. Regarding the term Commonwealth, the online monthly newsletter called Puerto Rico Report, published in 2011 and in 2013, that, and I quote, in 1950, the federal government authorized Puerto Rico to draft a local constitution for federal approval with the condition that the new document would not change Puerto Rico's status as a territory. End of quote. Part of this statement is again incorrect. There was not such a condition. If one examines Public Law 600, which is the piece of legislation by which Puerto Rico was authorized to draft the Constitution, one will not read that there was a condition that the new document would not change Puerto Rico's status as a territory. This is outrageous. How can anyone make such a firm statement, adding a false remark to what was enacted as a federal law? You may read the law yourself. What it actually says is that, and I quote, this act is now adopted in the nature of a compact so that the people of Puerto Rico may organize a government pursuant to a constitution of their own adoption. Maybe I should tell you that Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain since 1508 to 1898, for almost 400 years. And in 1898, there was a war between the United States and Spain. The United States won, Spain lost, so Spain ceded the sovereignty of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States and renounced to Cuban sovereignty. Those are the precise words of the Treaty of Paris of 1898. It gave sovereignty to the United States of 3 islands and left Cuba free. So in 1898, the U.S. acquired sovereignty of Puerto Rico. For 2 years, they established a military government, and in 1900, Congress enacted a law known as the Foraker Act, which established a civil government for Puerto Rico. This is in 1900. Then there was a second piece of legislation called the Jones Act in 1917, which gave Puerto Ricans the American citizenship. So up until 1952, which is the year that Puerto Ricans drafted their own constitution, Puerto Rico was a colony of the United States. But the U.S. never used the word colony. They used the word territory. So basically, a colony and a territory, it's pretty much the same. That's what I teach my students. A colony is a term used, in my opinion, more in the 17th, 18th centuries, and territory is the same thing, but a more modern word, I would say. So basically, Puerto Rico has been a territory or a colony most of its life, since 1508 to 1952. But there is a debate still today as if it is still a colony or not, and that's what this paper is all about. Caribbean Business, a widely read and well-respected online business periodical published by one of the largest Hispanic publishers of periodicals and magazines in the United States, as recently as September 8, 2013, stated that, and I quote, Puerto Rico remains an unincorporated U.S. territory, end of quote. On June 20th, 2013, the Boston Globe published an article by Julio Ricardo Varela entitled Free Puerto Rico from Political Limbo. The title itself explains the content. On May 24, 2013, the Hills Congress blog, this is United States, published Puerto Rico rejects its present colonial status, once statehood, by renowned Puerto Rican personalities, Jose Saldaña, DMD, and a lot of titles, and Norman Maldonado, MD, MACP, and a lot of titles, in which they argue that Puerto Rico is still a colony of the United States. The authors refer to Puerto Rico's plebiscite held during the November 6, 2012 general elections, where, and I quote, "the ballot consisted of 2 questions, and the results were as follows. Do you agree that Puerto Rico should continue to have its present form of territorial status? Commonwealth, yes or no?" 46% answered yes, and 54% answered no. But I say, how can you ask a constituency to choose between a territorial or non-territorial political status if Puerto Rico is not a territory of the United States? And the reference list of uninformed sources on the web goes on and on until it reaches 1,090,000 hits or 1,140,000, depends on Google or Yahoo. So let me tell you about the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and how it was established. In 1950, 52 years after the United States acquired sovereignty of Puerto Rico, President Harry S. Truman signed Public Law 600, an act to provide for the organization of a constitutional government by the people of Puerto Rico. It read, and I quote, "Be enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that fully recognizing the principle of government by consent, this act is now adopted in the nature of a compact, so that the people of Puerto Rico may organize a government pursuant to a constitution of their own adoption. This act shall be submitted to the qualified voters of Puerto Rico for acceptance or rejection through an island-wide referendum to be held in accordance with the laws of Puerto Rico. Upon the approval of this act by a majority of the voters participating in such referendum, the legislature of Puerto Rico is authorized to call a constitutional convention to draft a constitution for the said island of Puerto Rico. The said constitution shall provide a republican form of government and shall include a Bill of Rights. Upon approval by Congress, the constitution shall become effective in accordance with its terms. Except as provided in Section 5 of this Act, the Act entitled An Act to Provide a Civil Government for Puerto Rico and for other purposes, known as the Jones Act, approved on March 2, 1917 as amended, is hereby continued in force and effect and may hereafter be cited as the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act. That's a document as important as the Constitution, because the Constitution frames a government for Puerto Rico, but the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act is the document that states the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. Public Law 600 was ratified by Congress on June 30th, 1950, and signed by President Truman on July 3rd. It was ratified by the people of Puerto Rico on June 4, 1951, in a referendum which became the first of many more to come over the status question. On July 1st, 1951, the Puerto Rican legislature approved Law Number 1 for the establishment of a Constitutional Assembly to draft the Puerto Rico Constitution. The Assembly met at the Puerto Rico Capitol Building between September 17, 1951 and February 6, 1952, where they drafted and signed the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rico Constitution was ratified by the people of Puerto Rico in a referendum, the second one held over the status question. There have been 7 referendums in Puerto Rico. On March 3rd, 1952, it was approved by Congress, the U.S. Congress, on July 3rd, 1952 as Public Law 447. And the title of the law is the Joint Resolution Approving the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, which was adopted by the people of Puerto Rico on March 3rd, 1952. Public Law 447 was signed by President Truman the same day it was ratified by Congress on July 3rd, 1952. The Puerto Rico Constitutional Assembly accepted some amendments made by the U.S. Congress on July 10th by Resolution 34. The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico was officially inaugurated on July 25th, 1952. On July 28th, the Puerto Rico legislature approved approved Senate Concurrent Resolution number 2, which provided for submitting the amendments of sections 20 of Article 2 and section 3 of Article 7 to the people of Puerto Rico for approval on November 4th, 1952 elections. The people ratified the amendments, and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico became effective on January 29, 1953. The amendments were very simple changes that Congress made, but sometimes people blow this out of proportion. Very nationalist Puerto Ricans say we don't have freedom to write a constitution because it has to be approved by Congress. But one of the amendments regarded public education and private education. The Constitution says that it's mandatory for public school, the primary education, and it is also mandatory for private schools. Well, the U.S. Congress eliminated the provision to make private schools, primary schools, mandatory. So that's it. It's not like a big deal. And the other amendment was regarding amendments to the Constitution. It only says that they could not be against the United States Constitution. Basically, that was it. But other than that, it was approved just the way that the Puerto Ricans wrote it. Now, this is one of my favorite parts, and it has to do with the United Nations. On March 19 and March 20, 1953, the United States, and I quote, informed the United Nations of the establishment of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and stated that, I quote, in consequence of these constitutional changes, the government of the United States would cease to transmit information under Article 73E of the Charter. This is the United Nations Charter. The UN considered, and I quote, that the agreement reached by the United States of America and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico formed a political association, and these are the exact words, a compact, mutually agreed. It recognized that Puerto Rico, and I quote, have achieved a new political status and that have been invested with attributes of political sovereignty, which clearly identifies the status of self-government attained by Puerto Rican people as an autonomous political entity. Moreover, the UN assured that, and I quote, the Puerto Rican and the American people should conduct their relations under the present legal statute, and due regard will pay to the will of both countries. And as I said, this particular point is very interesting to me because in last year elections, 2012, the Popular Democratic Party, which is one of Puerto Rico's three main parties, there are three parties, one favors statehood, the other one independence, and the other one favors Commonwealth. Well, the one that favors Commonwealth should be the one defending the Commonwealth, right? But there was a division in the party last November between those who favored sovereignty for Puerto Rico and those who didn't favor sovereignty for Puerto Rico. And in my opinion, I think it's very absurd because the ones that favor sovereignty don't seem to have read the Constitution of Puerto Rico, because if you read the Constitution in Section 2 of Article 1, it says that Puerto Rico is a sovereign state. So those who say that want sovereignty don't know that they have it. And those that say that they don't want sovereignty, it's ridiculous, because how can you not want the right to choose whatever it is, the status you want to choose? So that's a situation in Puerto Rico. There's a lot of ignorance, and I've been working on this topic for almost 30 years. I started when I was 18. I wanted to know what was Puerto Rico's political status, and no one could give me a definite answer. I was talking to Richard a while ago about that, and I had to find out on my own, and that's what I've done for the last 30 years, and the result is this paper, which I intend to publish because it's been very difficult to understand the status. But once I do, I think it is very simple. Everything is written in the documents, but if you don't read the documents, then you don't know what's going on. Well, after the UN resolution, Puerto Rican politicians began their search to improve the Commonwealth. This is when the ambivalence took off. Puerto Rico's resident commissioner, Antonio Fernos Isern, prepared a draft of what was introduced in Congress as House Resolution 252 in 1953 as a bill to perfect the Commonwealth. In 1954, the Puerto Rico legislature approved Joint Resolution 21, which repeated itself as Joint Resolution number 2 in 1958, followed by the Fernos-Murray bill in Congress, which is House Joint Resolution 596 and Senate 2023 in 1959. Since then, the federal government has created 4 presidential task forces to review the Puerto Rico status question and make recommendations. The first presidential task force on the matter was appointed by President John F. Kennedy in 1961. It was known as an advisory group with members of the Cabinet and the Defense, State, and Justice Departments, as well as past presidential advisors. The group concluded that, I quote, "The nature of the Commonwealth allows Puerto Rico to develop mechanisms to carry on commercial relations, to participate in international organizations, including the United Nations and the like." Moreover, on July 25, 1961, President Kennedy issued a memorandum stating that, and I quote, "The Commonwealth structure and the relationship to the United States, which is in the nature of a compact, provide for self-government in respect to internal affairs and administration, subject only to the applicable provisions of the Federal Constitution, the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act, and the acts of Congress authorizing and approving the Constitution." End of quote. He also reversed President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1934 Executive Order number 6726, where FDR ordered the transfer of the administration of Puerto Rico from the War Department to the Interior Department. So even though in 1900 there was a civil government in Puerto Rico, the administration of the island was still under the War Department in 1934. So FDR changed that and transferred it to the Interior Department. As a matter of fact, it was President Roosevelt who realized that since 1898 to 1934, Puerto Rico's name had been misspelled in all official documents as Puerto Rico, P-O-R-T-O. There's even industries in Puerto Rico, like the Ferré family, which is a very, very wealthy Puerto Rican family. They had an industry called the Puerto Rico Iron Works, and it was spelled P-O-R, Puerto Rico, because American people, they don't say Puerto Rico, they say Puerto Rico, so they spell it like that. So it amazes me how the people of Puerto Rico would allow that, something so simple. How did you misspell my name? But that's how it was, and FDR was the one that said, hey, that's wrong, so let's spell it Puerto Rico. Going back to Kennedy, President Kennedy placed the administration of Puerto Rico in the hands of the executive. So, change from the War Department to the Interior Department to the executive branch. In 1962, Puerto Rico's Joint Resolution number 1 proposed once again to take measures to develop and enhance the Commonwealth. The Aspinall-O'Brien-Kyle Fernos bill in 1963 in Congress reviewed the matter. In 1964, Public Law 771 provided for the establishment of a second presidential task force, the United States Puerto Rican Commission on the Status of Puerto Rico. It was appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson and by Governor Luis Muñoz Marin. President Johnson stated, and I quote, "I am especially pleased that the initial meeting of the United States Puerto Rico Commission on the Status of Puerto Rico is being held in the White House. I welcome this opportunity to express my own deep personal interest in the work you are undertaking with warm and mutual understanding since it has characterized the relationship between the people of Puerto Rico and the people of the United States. I am confident this will continue. I have had numerous occasions to meet, to learn, to know, and to have admiration and affection for Puerto Rico. I will follow your work closely, and I pledge to your commission the full cooperation of the executive branch of the government in all your efforts." In 1966, the task force submitted a report which reaffirmed that Puerto Ricans are free to develop and enhance the provisions of the Commonwealth. It also recommended a plebiscite, which was held in 1967. With a vote of 61% in favor of the development of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, 39% favoring statehood, and less than 1% independence, it was clear that the people of Puerto Rico were at terms with the status quo. Accordingly, there was a mandate to find ways to improve the Commonwealth. However, the new Progressive Party, which favors statehood, won the general elections, and the steps towards enhancing the Commonwealth had to wait. The following year, in 1972, the Popular Democratic Party, the founders of the Commonwealth, won the elections once again. The following year, 1973, President Richard M. Nixon and Governor Rafael Hernández Colón appointed the members of the third presidential task force, known as the Ad Hoc Committee for the Development of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Its 1975 report, entitled Compact of Permanent Union between Puerto Rico and the United States, constituted the first formal revision of the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act. It was known in Spanish as El Nuevo Pacto and was introduced in Congress by Resident Commissioner Jaime Benitez in 1976. The House Subcommittee of Insular Affairs approved it, but did not reach the Senate. Congress recessed, and the Popular Democratic Party, headed by Governor Hernández Colón, lost the elections in Puerto Rico that year. So once again, the new Progressive Party won the general elections, and the opportunity for an enhanced Commonwealth had to wait. In 1989, the Hernández-Colón-Johnston bill, which is House Joint Resolution 5926 and Senate 2023, reintroduced in Congress the provisions of the Compact of Permanent Union between Puerto Rico and the United States. It was reviewed but not approved. Nonetheless, a referendum was held in 1991, and another one in 1993, and another one in 1998. A report on a Puerto Rican status political bill was issued in 1997, and the United States-Puerto Rico Political Status Act was introduced in Congress. The United States federal courts have been clear on the matter of Puerto Rico's status. In Mora versus Torres, 1953, the Federal District Court for the District of Puerto Rico stated that, and I quote, "It has been held that under the new compact, Puerto Rico is no longer a possession, territory, or dependency of the United States, but enjoys self-government and has a government which is no longer a federal government agency exercising delegated powers." The Boston's First Circuit Court stated that, and I quote, "And the federal government's relationship with Puerto Rico changed from being bounded merely by a territorial clause and the rights of the people of Puerto Rico as United States citizens to being bounded by the United States and Puerto Rico constitutions, Public Law 600, the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act, and the rights of the people of Puerto Rico as United States citizens." This is in Cordova versus Chase Manhattan Bank in 1981. The Supreme Court in Rodríguez versus Popular Democratic Party in 1982 expressed that, and I quote, "Puerto Rico, like a state, is an autonomous political entity sovereign over matters not ruled by the Constitution." On December 23, 2000, President Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 13183 to establish a fourth presidential task force on Puerto Rico's political status. Its sole focus was to examine proposals for Puerto Rico's future status and for a process by which Puerto Ricans could choose a status option. President George W. Bush amended the order in 2001 and in 2003, requesting a speed-up in the proceedings of the group. A report was rendered in 2005 and another one in 2007. The 2005 Presidential Task Force report explained more of the same, that Puerto Ricans may choose among statehood, Commonwealth, or independence. However, contrary to all previous presidential reports, it regarded Puerto Rico as a territory of the United States. The 2007 Presidential Task Force report reiterated and confirmed the position that had been expressed in the 2005 report, that Puerto Rico continued to be a territory of the United States under the plenary powers of Congress. In 2007, the Puerto Rico Senate approved a concurrent resolution urging the United Nations General Assembly to discuss Puerto Rico's case. In Congress, more bills were introduced, like the Puerto Rico Democracy Act of 2007, which was discussed but not approved in the House. And a new version of the same bill was introduced in 2010 for the same purpose, to hold another referendum on the island. Executive Order 1357, signed by President Barack Obama in 2011, renewed the Presidential Task Force on Puerto Rico's political status with the same purpose of all previous ones, however, expanding its mission to include recommendations for Puerto Rico's economic growth. Nonetheless, the 2011 report concluded the same, that the people of Puerto Rico are free to express their will. President Obama went to Puerto Rico a little bit before the 2012 elections, and he met with this lady journalist, Sidney Fleming. I don't know if you remember Sidney Fleming. Well, she's a very respected reporter, and the confusion over the status of Puerto Rico, it's so overwhelming that in the interview, she asked President Obama, well, what's your position on Puerto Rico's status? And the president said, well, whatever the people of Puerto Rico want, it's fine with me, just like that. So the interview goes on, and after a while, Sidney asks the president again, and by the way, she was the only journalist allowed to interview the president while he was in Puerto Rico. He was campaigning for the Democratic Party. So she asks the same question again, and he answers the same answer again. For the third time, she asks the same question, what's your position on Puerto Rico status? He answers the same. She asked a fourth time, and the president said, I have told you 4 times already. Whatever the people of Puerto Rico want is fine with me. So this is what I would like to know if it makes any sense to you, because it doesn't make any sense to me at all. But that's reality, and that's what I live every day of my life, and I'm just sharing it with you. President Obama sees Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States as one of partnership, and I'm quoting this word, in which, and I quote again, Puerto Rico faces great opportunities and considerable changes in creating a robust economy. The 2011 Presidential Task Force report reaffirms that, and I quote, Puerto Rico has the potential to enhance its economic growth by becoming a regional center for health, commerce, and clean, renewable energy. End of quote. This will benefit Puerto Ricans on one hand, but it will also benefit the United States, and I quote from the report, for the United States, Puerto Rico is a natural bridge for partnerships with the emerging economies of Latin America. In the United States, political parties usually focus on either more or less federal intervention in state matters and private matters. But it is a different story in Puerto Rico. Every aspect of the Puerto Rican life has some relation to the political status. Even education. When the pro-statehood New Progressive Party wins the general elections, English is required and enforced. When the pro-Commonwealth Popular Democratic Party wins the elections, they emphasize to strengthen Puerto Rican culture and the Spanish language. As a matter of fact, Governor Hernandez Colón received an award made by Spain in 1991. It's called the Príncipe de Asturias Award, and it was given to him by His Royal Highness Prince Felipe from Spain for making Spanish the official language of Puerto Rico. But then I come here and see you guys are bilingual. And I say, why can't we be bilingual? But even the language and education is politicized in Puerto Rico. That's the extent of it. The Smithsonian Magazine, so respected, seems to be clear on the terms of Puerto Rico's predicament. I quote, "The issue of political status is one under constant debate, with some in favor of statehood, others independence, and still others of the continuation of the Commonwealth status. The Smithsonian sees Puerto Rico's political status as a Commonwealth." And so it is, but after countless of congressional bills, congressional laws, state laws, and as many joint resolutions, 4 executive orders, 4 presidential task force committees, 6 presidential reports, and 7 referendums, in 2013, the status of Puerto Rico is neither clear for the majority nor understood by most. As we speak, the debate continues. Bills keep coming in, talks never cease. This essay addressed the political status of Puerto Rico from an educational standpoint. Is Puerto Rico a sovereign state, or is it submitted to the will of the United States? Puerto Rico is not a territory. It is a free state associated to the United States. Maybe it will be simpler if instead of drafting so many bills to improve the Commonwealth, or to propose referendums to decide on the status question, the official name of Puerto Rico be translated into English as the Free Associated State of Puerto Rico instead of the Commonwealth. As a historian, my views reflect a historical perspective which merely pretends to present the facts. My conclusions are based on over 30 years of academic research and scrutiny from all possible angles from which to approach the subject. May each reader, or in this case the audience, judge them in their own way. Thank you very much.